The beauty of this is that the discovery of, oh, I chose that, allows you the freedom to say, well, that's kind of silly. I wouldn't choose that today. So why am I?
Hello, and welcome to the Rise Again podcast. My name is Dr. Peter Risenen. My passion is people, harnessing their potential and the positive impact that makes on our world. On this podcast, I interview guests who share their journey of tapping into their resilience, strength, fortitude, and mental toughness required to rise from the ashes and live a fulfilling life. My purpose became very clear to me after I experienced a traumatic brain injury and a near-death experience in 2010. Months after that accident, I embarked on a bicycle journey from the Pacific to the Atlantic Ocean, 4,400 miles over 55 days across the United States and Canada, from Washington State to Maine, in a quest that started me on my path doing what I love. To be surrounded by God's created nature and the people He created to give me insight on my quest to live my best life and help others create that for themselves. I believe we all grow tremendously through our adventures and misadventures. My ventures in hormone optimization, integrative medicine, counseling, my own marriage, and the fostering and adoption of my beautiful son have allowed me to create a different future, untethered from my past, allowing me to live the life I've always wanted, to pursue what matters, and more importantly, to help others do the same by working with them to create a resilient mind and body, as well as a purpose-filled spirit needed to live a life of thriving. Welcome to the journey. It's time to rise again. If any of these guests speak to you, do the next best thing and reach out to them. Each guest has a wisdom that only they can have from their own unique experience. Your journey awaits. Let's get going and start taking that next step together. Through the work I do as a medical director of a men's health and hormone optimization clinic in Arizona, as well as the medical director for a nonprofit catering to providing the best of integrative care to military veterans, foster and adoptive families, people experiencing low and fixed income, and health professional students in training, I love what I do. I hope you guys enjoy this podcast. Let's all do the work and follow the steps to rise again. Hello, and welcome back to the 80th episode of the Rise Again podcast. And today, back in the studio, Jack Martin. Jackson and I are going to talk about feelings and beliefs today. And this is stuff that often comes from our childhood and it comes into our adulthood, sometimes unwanted. And we don't know why we react certain ways or why we behave certain ways. So we're going to unpack some of this today in real time here on the podcast. Hope you guys really enjoy today's episode with Jackson Martin. You just roll into the office, you're looking fresh as ever. Just came back from like the coolest vacation ever. Just give us a little bit of a background as to what happened on vacation.
Oh, dude, that was unbelievable. So 3 weeks, took the family on what we call the Martin family epic RV trip, right? I'm not so fond of the 3 days of travel to get to northern Montana. But once we get there, oh my gosh, we're a couple miles outside of the park. So we went up to a place called Lake 5. Staying right at the lake, we got our RV there, full hookups. They got kayaks and paddle boards. Essentially that could have been a vacation in itself. But now we get to go into the park. So we're talking about Glacier National Park and do all the exploration there and do the road to the sun and all that stuff. So that was really cool. Then we spent some time, running across to Sandpoint. We went over to like Eastern Washington, visit some family members there. Then we went to Silverwood. So that's kind of like, theme park, like Six Flags.
The kids are all cheering right now as they're listening to this.
They were loving life, man.
Yeah. How many kids did you have with you?
5. So there's 7 of us, camping in the camper. So it's a little tight. You better love each other when you're doing that, right? So we spent some time, a couple days there, and then we finished up in Coeur d'Alene, my brother's house, and then we traveled south. So yeah, 3 weeks, working as little as possible, only when it's important, and then, focus on being a dad.
How was it? What would the kids rate it as success?
Oh, they would all do it again. Although they would probably skip the visiting old friends of mine. They just want to go to the theme park and be on the lake and, do all that fun stuff. But it was a blast.
It's awesome. Every summer in Arizona, I always would tell people who, when I lived here, and I always wanted to seem like I was, summers are better. Every year you live here, they're better. And I'm like, I just got to a point where I'm like, man, summers just suck. Arizona. I'm like, I'm finally just like, I'm just being authentic about it. I'm like, summers just are hard, guys. Like, you need to get out of here for a bit to come back and actually be able to go, okay, we can manage the rest of the summer, and we've had so much rain. It's been so humid, and we've had some lower temp days, and this week's can be back up in the hundreds again and whatever. But you know what? That's okay. I'm kind of looking at, it's like September's pretty much going to be here, and then it's going to start cooling down a little bit in the evenings, but then October, it'll start cooling down in the evenings. And then November is just glory days.
Yeah, we try to stay here until you just can't stand it anymore. And then you take off for several weeks. And then when you get back, it's pretty close to the end. That's what we just did. It's fun.
We're trying to put together a little like a father-son trip with some other guys to like San Diego and just pull some camper trailers, whatever else. And we might even, last minute, you might end up having to stay in some, rest area for the night with the camper trailers or whatever, something like that. Or we could stay in hotels with a bunch of guys too. We've got probably, I don't know, maybe 6 to 10 who'd like to go. And maybe that's boys and fathers together, but I'm thinking maybe mid-September or something like that. But then we have a trip to Newport Beach coming up in September too. And I'm really excited about that. That'll be a fun getaway. And then, then for anybody who's hunting season's going to be here, and that's going to be a blast for people. And then we'll have fall and just rolling right into the glory days here in Arizona. So
good times roll.
Yeah. Let the good times roll. Let's talk about what you were kind of envisioning.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for those who are unfamiliar, Peter's going to help me kind of be the sounding board for me as I write this marriage retreat book. So essentially, this book, it's one husband's experience of screwing up marriage and then going through this process of, getting to where a marriage is really good and just sharing that, like how we do that, right? So the book is really designed to share a couple fundamentals that are really important to understand. And then the rest of it's a workbook where you actually go do it. You don't have to know what to do. You just grab the book, go on your marriage retreat, do a little bit of planning, and then just fill out the book, right? So that's the idea. So this first fundamental that we talked about last time we met was listening. And this next one is really about belief, where it's like, there's a lot underneath that. Belief is really a broad subject, right? Mm-hmm. So it encompasses kind of like all of the beliefs that you've tethered your life to in the past, and then what beliefs you're choosing today moving forward, and then recognition of the idea that, in your childhood, like sometimes these beliefs you didn't even really choose. They were kind of chosen for you or they were given to you, and how powerful it is that your subconscious, or how powerful your subconscious is in kind of running the program that's in the background that's controlling your life. And understanding these two fundamentals, to me, it's kind of like if you could envision, you're in your marriage, you and your spouse are about to take your marriage from where it is today to where you'd like it to be. And that gap in the middle is this 1 mile long field of 2.5 foot deep heavy snow. You get this big heavy backpack on your back and there's no trail, or at least you haven't found the trail. And you're just trudging through this snow, right? So if you understand these fundamentals, like the power of being able to actively listen, it's almost like you get to take off your backpack. So now you're going through the same field of snow, but you don't have that weight that you have to carry. So it's really important to consider like understanding these fundamentals and being open to the idea that I still have a lot of room to grow here and learn. Will make this journey from where my marriage is to where I'd like it to be easier. And then understanding this whole idea around beliefs, and there's a lot that we'll kind of unpack here as we talk about this, would be like being given a set of snowshoes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then it really makes this journey from where you are to where you'd like your marriage to be just like tremendously easier. And then of course, the more you work on these things and the more that you grow in these areas, like then eventually you just kind of find the path, and now you could literally run, to the other side of that field. So I like to share that analogy with people so that you can kind of appreciate the power of understanding these fundamentals.
Yeah, that's really good. I think the active listening piece that we talked about definitely struck a chord with a lot of people. It was a good one. And I know some people who've listened to it many times. First time they've really ever been exposed to it in like a setting where somebody's just talking about active listening. Belief and feelings and all this stuff that we're going to talk about today, and where we came from, like you said, and these beliefs and stuff that we had, or we didn't really realize we were choosing them. And sometimes we just picked them up and we took them on kind of as a survival thing in a certain sense, but we lived our whole lives with them. And then you come to a certain spot and you're like, wait a second, are these beliefs and are these feelings, are they serving me? And what's our intended goal and outcome? And sometimes it's in the worst case scenarios, you have, and this isn't even the worst, but people's marriages could fall apart. And they start to realize, they have kids and they start to have things going on in their life that aren't happening, that they're not going the way that they would want them to go. And these old things kind of rear their heads, right? From the way that their operating system that they've always run off of. And then it's like, okay, wait a second. Why do I do things this way? So I think this is profound.
I love the concept of the operating system. To me, reflect on my own marriage and the operating system that I either chose without thinking that I was choosing it, or maybe it was given to me, or maybe it was kind of learned or assumed, or maybe part of it was genetic. Like that's the way dad did it, so that's the way I do it. The way his dad did it, so that's the way he did it. So it's that kind of a thing. And then I look at some of those cross, on the other operating system that I'm married to, and how, she was, it really manifests in behavior. And sometimes the behavior is pleasant, and sometimes it's not so pleasant. When you can kind of look at where the pain is, or where the friction is, or where the when do you get angry, and what are all these things that kind of tend to repeat themselves? Usually there's some kind of underlying programming, the operating system that's just running in the background and it's kind of controlling your life. So there's that more obvious stuff, but then there's also that subconscious thing. In this, some people will hear this and say, well, that's a little woo-woo. It involves energy. So like, let's say, for example, that you're a person who believes that life is difficult. Well, then life will show up for you to be right. It'll be difficult for you. Or let's say that you believe that all people are evil. So it'll turn out for you that you'll attract evil people. So it's really difficult to embrace that. Be open to the idea that maybe all of these things that continue to happen in my life is because of the programming that I chose. Or you don't remember choosing it, but you haven't chosen anything else. Like you're still choosing that every day, even though maybe you chose it as a child when you were 5, you're still choosing it, right? And some of these things are really simple. And I'm sure, you being a doctor, like you can, you've heard a lot of this, but like the simple one for me, so I'll share the story, like the programming that was running my life. I was 5 years old. I was in a huge family. I chose I'm not good enough. So even though I was the boy who did all of his chores and tried to make sure that everything was working well for everybody and that my mom was always happy, because we had a huge family, my mom didn't need to pay attention to me because there was other people that were not doing their chores, or they were a problem that needed to be solved. And I was just this kind of background. Like, that dude's not a problem. I don't need to focus on him, right? So discipline was more of my parents' focus than recognition or acknowledgement, or, which is normal with a huge family. So it's not my parents' fault that I chose this. It's nobody's fault, right? It's not even really my fault that I chose it, but that's what I chose. Mm-hmm. So fast forward, in my 40s, before I discover this is what I chose. So think about how that shows up in your life if you're not good enough. As soon as you start to prove that you're good enough, then the programming has to be right. So you're going to self-sabotage, or something's going to show up in your life to crash what you've just done. And exactly. You can think across all aspects of your life how powerful that would be. And it doesn't really matter how hard you're working on overcoming whatever it is you're trying to overcome, that program is still running it in the background. The beauty of this is that the discovery of, oh, I chose that, allows you the freedom to say, well, that's kind of silly. I wouldn't choose that today. So why am I? And then it gives you that space to choose something new. And then you don't have to choose, I'm good enough. You can choose, I'm amazing, because that's who we are. We're amazing. God created us.
Beautifully said. I think most people you visit with, if they could choose something different, if you just asked them, like, what would you choose today if you could choose to be anything? I mean, they kind of think it's crazy because, it's kind of like, well, what do you mean I can choose anything? Here I am. This is how I'm feeling, whatever else. When they get to that spot where they realize that the decisions that, I think a lot of people come to that at some point in their life where they realize, like, okay, I'm running off of belief systems and things that I've chosen in the past, or paradigms I've behaved within in the past, maybe running on a certain operating system. When you get to choose something different, it's pretty amazing. There's a lot of work that's involved in helping yourself rewrite that so that you can continually live in that.
For sure.
You're going to slip back. You just our nature, right? But the same thing is true that the more you do it, the more practice you give it, eventually it does become the new operating system. And it's primarily going to be the one that you can live your life in. However, like we said, you're going to have those moments where you're going to slip back into maybe self-defeating behavior or whatever it is, but you can catch yourself where maybe a a blow up before would have been lasted a full week, maybe in your marriage or whatever else. All of a sudden you catch it, you realize it, and you've also talked about it with your spouse. They understand your old operating system, and you can really help each other self-correct.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
How cool is that?
I think that's the environment that you want to do it in too. So think about, you could do this with a psychologist or somebody that's a professional that you go see on a monthly basis, right? So you get that reminder once a month. You do this with your spouse, you're with them every day, right? Or at least you're exposed to them part of the day, every day. And then giving them permission to remind you, like, hey, when you see me doing this, just remind me, right? So even though this, many, many years of practicing, I'm amazing, Andrea will still tell me, hey, there's still some cobwebs there. Like, you still got some cleanup to do. You can't practice or have an operating system run your life for 40 years and then not have some habits that take longer to break.
And we're going from ego, which ego kind of means everyone has ego. It means I. Our goal is to go from running off of just all about ego, all about myself and I, to we. And so once your spouse knows as well that, hey, like, check my ego at the door when this thing rears its head or whatever, and they can do that and remind you, that much quicker you can snap back to, oh yeah, that's right. And thank you. And I appreciate that. That was actually, I needed that.
Yeah, a little tough to do when you're emotional.
Mm-hmm.
If you work on that, you give permission. Andrew and I have our own little keywords or key phrases that we use that kind of like, okay, when you say that means I have to shut up and really listen to you, or I got to go take a break or whatever it is. It still could be powerful in emotional moments. Let's talk about a couple more of these statements, like the I'm not good enough. I don't have any power. So you think about a child who, for whatever reason, when they were young, it doesn't have to be a child, but, some traumatic event takes place in their life where someone is controlling them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Could be an abusive relationship. Could be, you never had any power in the situation.
Yeah.
And as a kid, you don't really have much power, so it couldn't easily become a part of the operating system. I've met many people who feel like, it's not really up to them. And these are people who don't really make decisions because, you know what? I don't have the power to make decisions, right?
Yeah. So think about, fast forward, like what that program or that operating system running in the background, what the impact that has, right? Fast forward. You tend to attract people in your life that will be stealing power from you. So even if you work really hard to go, build confidence and take courses or learn martial arts or some kind of thing where you kind of feel like, okay, I got my power back. If that program is still running back there, they don't have any power, you'll naturally attract people and circumstances in your life that will cause that to come true, and you'll feel that way again.
Yep, beautifully said. I love that.
So there's a couple more here that kind of jump to mind, like, I don't trust anybody. It's dangerous to be vulnerable.
There's many reasons why that would pop in, right? You're learning about all this stuff when you're younger too. And it's not, there's an appropriate vulnerability with certain people. We're not supposed to be like intimate with everybody, right? There's a certain amount of okay, like to reveal a certain amount, but there's people in our life where maybe you revealed way too much, or you told them something that was vulnerable, and then they took advantage of you with that information you shared with them. It was supposed to be more confidential, and all of a sudden everybody knows, or otherwise, maybe it's someone you trusted.
Yeah, it could be something really simple. Like, you're at school as a little dude, right? And somebody promised you that they were going to do this, and then they didn't fulfill on their promise. It's like,
right.
People aren't trustworthy, right? So it's interesting how simple some of these things can be, especially as a child. It's not anyone else's fault. It's just kind of how we are as humans, and we choose things. So it can be a traumatic event that causes it. It can be something super simple.
Yeah, good point.
I felt cheated.
Right. Yeah. It could be something super simple, and it could be something super traumatic. Like you said, there's two ends of the spectrum. The traumatic one would be like, I had a guest on the podcast a long time ago, Beatrice. She was she felt powerless at home. Her dad would come home and essentially touch her and rape her every night up until she was, this is super traumatic, right? Up until she was like 9 or 10 years old. So she was totally powerless in that situation. And that OS was running for so long that now she's in like a super healthy relationship. Her husband's super supportive. And it's amazing. She went to college. There was a lot of things that worked out. And that was just an incredible story of how even the traumatic stuff, it doesn't need to be a life sentence. You have the key. You are locked in the prison, right? But you also have the key.
Yeah. It's like, that's who I was, but that's not who I have to choose to be forever.
Amen. Yes.
Yeah. There's another one that's really popular, or it's common, that you'll find people that their statement about themselves is I'm wrong or I'm bad. And it could be as simple as they were told, like, you're just a screw up. You're never going to amount to anything, or whatever that is, right? Could be from their home relationship, but it also could be at school. It could be on the playground. It doesn't necessarily have to be that this is something that always came from your parents. But I think the point of it is that, being open to the idea that there is something, like just open that door and look in there and say, what is it that potentially could be running my life? Have a conversation about it. You and those who know you and love you would be like, oh yeah, I know what that is. It's this. Okay, do I want it to be that? For me, like I went through, hypnotherapy in my very first session. Like she exposed, like what's what you chose. I was like, oh, that's silly. Like, a 5-year-old chose this thing, and then that's been running my life for 40 years, right? I think the point of it is then it allows you to choose something new. It's like adding fuel to the fire of growth when it comes to improving your marriage.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I would actually go even a little bit further and say that there's different, from my experience, my own personal experience, and we all have different ones, is that I chose something when I was also very small, when I was middle-aged or like an adolescent, and then something as I was a little bit older too. And so there was different times in life where we pick up things, It may not be one time from just 5 years old, right? It could be multiple things that you've picked up along the way or that you've made meaning out of, right? Around certain things. And they might be like triggers. One of my favorite psychologists talks about triggers being, he gets so excited when people are triggered because that actually shows where the work that needs to be done is. And it's like the key. You have the key to like, you start working on that area or right around there. Like, cause I don't know anybody who says that they like triggers, but it's like you have a psychologist saying, oh, there's a trigger. That's perfect. That's right. Now I know that we've got something that we can work on. Cause ideally you're not really triggered by anything. Like you have experiences and you're like, oh, okay, well that was what it was. And this is how I'm going to, respond to it instead of being in reactive mode, when you're just like, when you're flooded with emotion and you're just, you react instead of choosing an appropriate response, you just kind of react. And when I heard that the first time, his name is David Rico and he's got a book, I think it's called Triggers. I actually picked it up. I have not read it yet, but his talk was so profound on that I was like, ooh, I need to read this book on triggers. So that whole, commentary on that, on the triggers and stuff, I think that brings up those different times in our life where we picked something up where we didn't really need to pick anything up, but that's where it's our work to let that go.
Yes, a good segue too, because triggers usually manifest themselves in emotions. So, and kind of part of this whole belief conversation includes the fuel of those, which is feelings. So you can, you look back at like, all of the things that if you ask like, hey, what are your top 5 beliefs, right? There's a feeling that's attached to those. It kind of like, it gives fuel to the belief, right? Makes it stronger. Even on the negative side, like, when I get triggered, and Andrea's good at that too. She's like, oh yeah, there you go. I saw that happen, right? There's emotion associated with it, frustration or anger or fear or whatever it is that comes along with it.
The appropriate response is like, we all are going to have feelings that pop up for us, but then the emotion is like the physical involvement along with the feelings. So there's like the feelings sometimes generate emotions from us and sometimes they don't. Sometimes you might have a feeling and you're like, okay, ideally the feeling just kind of comes and goes. It's giving you in a response, kind of like a flag, like it kind of tells you something and it's kind of guiding you in how you should respond to it because were you violated? Maybe someone who spoke over you and it's like, hey, wait a second, I have a voice here. And you kind of get a little perturbed about it, or you feel like the person didn't give you the time that, they didn't actually listen to you. Well, then it's like that feeling maybe just is what it is, or maybe there's some emotion behind it, which is more charged, right? And there's a little bit of a response in your body from that. The ideal scenario is you kind of have a feeling and it comes and you notice it and you're like, oh, interesting, I have a feeling that, right?
That's a mature progression though.
Yes, so it is a mature progression.
Particularly when we look at a marriage with two people who are, a marriage in theory is we're individuals living our own lives, but we're sharing our lives with each other. And of course, we're raising children around this too. But there's a lot of feelings that show up there. And your spouse knows all of yours and all your triggers and how you react and all your feelings. They know those all, right? And you know your spouses. Mm-hmm. We probably know our own, but we're not really interested in looking in there to see like, okay, like what's going on there, right? And what is the underlying trigger and what's the emotion? Why do I react that way? Why do I behave that way? The mature place that you just spoke to is that when you can experience a feeling that occurs and just kind of say hello to it. Like, hey, I see you there. What's going on? And not react to it. Like it doesn't have power over you. It's right. You just notice it, an awareness of it. And it becomes contemplative or, you curious about it. Like, why do I feel that way when she says that or does that?
A beautiful thing I've heard is that I really like this too, is that when something comes up for you, if you can say, instead of trying to push it away, just being like, of course. And this was like a seminar, and I was at this conference, and it was like a psychology / psychology counseling conference style setup. And there was, the talk was about like, when something happens, if you can say, of course, to that, it gives you a different perspective. And because, you think about the things that happen when you feel something, you get so charged by it, or maybe triggered or whatever. And like you push it away and you don't want to deal with it. And it's like, and you push back maybe, instead of it being there and being like, of course it's here. Like, I'm feeling insecure right now. And then that gives you that extra space to be like, okay, like there's something that I actually have to deal with here.
There's a humorous way to do that too. Something that's really popular in our house. And it's the source of this. You would die laughing if I told you the source of this. But what we've learned is that in the beginning of an argument, like, that the sticks are there and it's being lit. Like that fire is about to be lit. And there's something that's said that's a little edgy or maybe accusatory, or you did this, or you always do this, right? Instead of engaging in that, it's like, oh, you're probably right. That's it. And then it becomes funny, or it becomes mildly kind of a joke, right? But it's early before there's emotions that really that inferno gets lit, right? So it's almost like just pouring water on that fire before it even starts, right?
Yeah.
So a similar way to approach that, but it's become really popular in our marriage. That's the most common saying. Like, when you feel some kind of conflict that's about to begin, you're probably right. It doesn't say they are. It doesn't say you're wrong. It just kind of diffuses it all.
I mean, I would imagine that when it's a genuine, you are probably right, because, we often will, if we can look at it from that perspective. I like that, because really, if I can be getting into something and maybe my wife says something to me and I'm like, I catch myself like, she is probably right on this thing, or whatever. And it's like, so there's truth to that too, where if she's getting worked up about it, because we know each other really well, right? You know Andrea real well, and I know Kath real well. And so for me, it's like, when she's got something she feels really strongly about, well, why am I not considering it that she actually is right? Because there's been so many times where I felt that I was right on something. And it's like,
well, it allows you some space.
Why do I have to be right?
It allows you some space to consider what they just said without, discoloring it with an argument, right? Or whatever thoughts immediately come, flying into your head. But it also is kind of neat that can be followed up with kind of a playful hug or a kiss or something like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's like it completely diffuses what could have become an argument. So it's a really neat saying to adopt, or like weapon to kind of have at the ready.
Fire extinguisher.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I like the idea of that prior to a charged, emotional, and even there's that whole, you've probably seen the breakdown of like, so when something happens, what often happens, and you just hear people speak, someone will do something and the other person will say, I hate it when you X or whatever, like they're blaming the other person for something, right? When in reality, the other person isn't making you feel anything. You're feeling it yourself. So when you feel something about a way somebody is reacting, the positive way to go about responding to that individual without making it accusatory, which diffuses a lot right there. And it just allows, I feel upset when you blank. And then what I need from you is blank. I'll just use a home example. So I feel bugged when you, or Kath could tell me this, because oftentimes like I'll take we'll use, right now we got rid of one of the cars. So we've just got one to just do, because the office is so close to the house. So it's like, she could tell me, I feel, instead of like, I hate it when you take the car and I can't go anywhere during the day. It's like, I feel bugged that I didn't drop you off at the office. So then what I need from you is to let me know when you want to go to the office an hour earlier, so then I can drop you off. So it's kind of like, you can see how instead of saying, I hate that you took the keys and went to the office, which automatically puts me on the defensive, because then I have to come up with some response, and it's kind of like, well, you threw the ball in my court. Now it's like, but maybe she feels bugged that I took the car and I drove to the office and I didn't give her planning time in advance to go, oh, okay, she could drop me off. She could have a different reaction around it. So the whole blaming versus, that's a huge one. And that's been very instrumental even in my life in dealing with things, is whether it's marriage, otherwise is like, I feel, whether it's angry or upset or triggered or whatever, and it's my feeling. I'm taking ownership for it. I feel blank when you do a certain thing.
It.
I chose it.
That's right.
It's not you're an idiot or whatever.
That's right. So it's really interesting that you take that exact example and let's escalate it a little bit,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So it's like, I'll be the wife, right? And it's like, honey, you piss me off. You always take the freaking car, and then I'm left stranded. Okay, that's way different than her, just saying that she's upset, right? Okay, now think how powerful it would be for you to say, yeah, you're probably right. And then, hey, babe, come here, give me a hug. I apologize. What can we do to fix that, right? Like it's so simple, right? I think this is recognizing, and let's go back to the analogy of the snowshoes, recognizing that people have beliefs and that there are feelings. Like those are real. Like you experience feelings. I don't choose them. You do, right? I'll probably say something or I'll probably do something, or maybe I have a pattern of saying and doing things that cause you to have these feelings. You're still choosing them, but it's just a recognition that these are happening. They are happening. So just from the awareness, like both of you, husband and wife, are saying, hey, we know this stuff exists. Let's work together on living a life that even with these things, like we can get to the other side of this field and have an amazing marriage. To take belief, kind of pivot back to belief and take it to more of a macro level, regardless of how you believe with respect to faith, religion, just to recognize that the power of letting go and that letting God or there's a higher power in our lives that's guiding our lives. And we don't really need to know everything. We don't have to plan it out. We don't have to understand everything. Like we just trust that whatever the path is that our life is supposed to take is going to work out. And that for whatever reason, God brought us together. And we knew it when we got married that we were in love with each other. And we still know that that's the case. So let's get over to this other side where have our marriage be what we really want it to be. But let's believe that we don't need to understand exactly the path that's going to get there. This belief, I think, is a really powerful thing. So both from kind of understanding beliefs that we've chosen in the past and understanding beliefs that the power of the beliefs that we will choose moving forward on more of a temporal or today or a now perspective. And then also kind of more globally, with respect to, I don't have to understand everything, that there's a guide here. And if I trust that I'll be guided, then I will.
If you need to know everything and you need to have everything figured out, I mean, life is really, really tough. And especially when it comes to marriages. And like you said, I mean, I believe that God brings couples together. And so if that's the case, well, then he also knows your future and he knows why you were brought together. And part of it is trusting and knowing that he's going to help guide you. And so if you can leave some of that up in the air and not have it figured out, well, then doesn't that make a whole lot easier because you're never going to have it all figured out? I mean, you're just going to be either going in for therapy every week or trying to figure other things out if you always feel like you need to have the answers as to why things are the way they are. You're never going to really understand that all the way. One thing I was thinking about too is, so say you do get blamed by your spouse or your spouse blames you, you can realize that it is still their feeling that they're having, even though they're blaming you. And you can even say, it sounds like you're feeling frustrated right now.
That goes right back to the active listening that we just talked about last time.
See how these all kind of connect, right? This is super interconnected because
it seems like I offended you.
Yeah. I know I offended you. Like the way that you responded, like I know I offended you. I sincerely did not want to offend you. Like, let's unpack it because I want to take care of whatever offense I caused or whatever. And maybe we'll discover something, you don't need to say this, but you'll probably discover something at that time. Maybe it can be a good learning opportunity as well. So you don't need to get pulled into a charged conversation when there is a charged conversation that, the fire's been lit, right? You can choose to walk away from that conversation too and just be like, you know what, like I want to discuss this. Maybe I need to walk away for just a few minutes and like, let me just think about what's gone on here and maybe how I can have appropriate response. Sometimes time is like awesome. You need that couple minutes to just walk away, go sweep the patio, go do some dishes or whatever else, and then come back to it and have a more wholesome, untriggered conversation. But I believe that we all have it in us to discharge the atmosphere. If there's a big charge in the atmosphere, we all have it in us to be able to be the one. It takes a bigger person, right? They say to walk away from a fight than to start it or go into a fight. Just walk away from it and be like, because it's kind of a funny saying, but you can't fight alone, right? So, I mean,
right. It takes two.
It takes two. Yeah. So
you want to argue about that one? Yeah. Argue with the wall. I'm over here and I'm not going to have that argument.
Right. But I'm also here when you want to have a civil conversation about the thing that happened, because I do understand it was a big deal. And I actually would like to take care of that and make sure that we can we can work through this. So like, I would like to step away for a little bit. Why don't you go do something for a little bit and like, let's come back and have a good conversation about it.
It doesn't really even need to be said, but like apology or forgiveness is like throwing water on the fire of
For
that
sure.
fight for sure. So
Yeah, you're
it's
right.
always a great place to start when there's that kind of conflict. Let's go back to letting go. It's really interesting. I heard this anecdote and I just really like, or this analogy, I really like it. So imagine that your life, and you could say that you could apply this to your marriage or any relationship that you have. So a relationship with your child or a coworker or anything. It's like driving a car. And the way that it's supposed to be, your experience is supposed to be, you are in the backseat and you're being driven. Okay, but we naturally, feel this need for control. So we're gripping the wheel tight and we're trying to steer. And this greater hand that's at work in our life is trying to get us to go to the right. And we could feel the car pulling to the right and we're just struggling to straighten it out and keep it going left. And it just is exhausting to live your life that way. It's exhausting to be in any relationship that's that way. And that's all comes down to our, desire to be in control. And we feel like we are if we're just grabbing the wheel and gripping it tight and fighting wherever way it's pulling. Understanding, and this is another kind of, it all comes into this. It's an awareness of the appreciation or the belief that you don't need to be at the wheel. Just get out of the front seat, get in the back, and allow that greater hand to guide your life and for it to steer. And just be excited about where it shows up. You can have kind of a childlike wonder or curiosity about what's around the next corner and enjoy the ride with the people around you instead of always trying to be in control.
I love that. I love it. You put a few things into and for everyone to think about too. I mean, think of how many struggles we've had in our lives where if we would have just let go and just, it ended up a certain way anyways, no matter how much effort we put into it, right? If we would have just actually gone with what was happening, it would have happened that much sooner. We wouldn't have wasted all that energy, all that time, and we wouldn't have ruined the relationships that we did or whatever it is. It's like, there's so much that's happening. And it's like, I think that the trail, if you were to go a step even away from the car analogy, which I think that's pretty apropos because look at, the self-driving cars and stuff like that. I was kind of chuckling thinking about all the self-driving stuff that's, being created and whatnot. But I mean, that just funny side note on that one. It's like, think about how much we're going to be able to get done with self-driving cars. I mean, it's just like sit in the back seat and just kind of hang out and call your friend up and whatever. And it's like, oh yeah, I'm getting driven to X, Y, or Z. I'm not driving, I'm getting driven, So it's like that whole explaining how we're getting places is not going to be like, I'm driving right now. It's like, I'm getting driven. But yeah, I think so much of life, it's the very, very small things. Think about what you can't do if you're just hanging onto the wheel, right? You can't be observant about what's going on around you. There's so many things that are no longer accessible to you if you're just got a death grip on the wheel and you're just fighting the force that's moving the car in a certain direction.
Yeah, no, that kind of brings that analogy to the next level. So consider who's in the back seat with you if you're doing it right. You're in the front gripping the wheel and fighting it. You can't even appreciate the people that you're with. I think what's fascinating about my journey or my discovery of all of this, as I've went from one side of the field to the other, and I'm not all the way at the other side, but I could see it. I found the path. So now I'm walking on the path, and I really like to help people get rid of their backpack and get a pair of snowshoes and then eventually find the path. Like it's been so impactful in my life to have my marriage go this direction that it's also impacting all the other relationships in my life. But what I find to be fascinating about my journey in marriage, having married the girl of my dreams and then kind of messed it up, grind through all of this growth and learning and discovery to get it right, is that now I get to enjoy the girl, like the things that I loved about the girl that I fell in love with in the first place. So all this other clutter and that control and gripping the wheel takes away from appreciating the person that I fell in love with in the first place. And this has kind of allowed that environment to where I can sit in the back seat with her, enjoy the scenery with her, enjoy the journey with her, and then enjoy the things that I love about her.
You mentioned about the other people in your life, but how about your family? How have your kids responded to all this?
Oh, dude. The older ones say they got gypped. It's like, hey, Dad, the way that you were a father, the way you showed up as a father when I was growing up, like these younger ones are getting the good deal, right? So, we don't get to choose where we are, where we fall in the family either. And I think that you, just like I got the children I was supposed to get, who taught me the lessons that helped me be a great father and a better person. As a child, I got the place in the family and the parents I was supposed to get. that allowed me to become who I am as well. But yeah, there's no question that the environment at the Martin house is just as dramatically different as the environment in our marriage, for sure.
One thing that it would be interesting to bring up, and this is because it's very emotional and close to me, is some of the things that I even chose and the things that I had believed even about people in my life were really meaningful. But situations that happened and things that I made it mean, having gone through the actual finding out about all these different things that I've made up about various people and situations, is to now to complete it. My dad and I are closer than I've ever been. It's just amazing. I mean, it's like the relationship I always wanted with my dad, right? And there were things that I made up about myself or about my life that really came from my wanting to have a really close relationship with my dad, not really having that growing up. He was doing his, like you said, very best, raising the family, trying to put a roof over our heads. We lived in a nice area in Arizona. We didn't live in the slums, and he did his absolute darndest to make sure that we were going to be well taken care of. Well, fast forward, right? I come through life. I've had these experiences where I really wanted to exert my own control, grip the wheel of life, and try to take it away from my dad, because I felt like, and he and I have had very transparent conversations about this. I felt like, I just told him, I said, I felt like you were controlling at that time in my life. I wanted to exert control. This is what I did. This is why I acted certain ways. Do you know how much clarity children can give to their parents if they tell their parents why they did certain things and why they behaved certain ways? Because you know what? Those parents are still thinking that they're totally clueless many times, right? Their OS, their operating system was running a certain way. They just did what they did. And like you said, it wasn't their fault. They just did what they were doing, but they don't know why certain things happened. For me to have these conversations with my dad, I always felt like there was something there. We never really kind of cleared it up because I wasn't totally authentic with him, because I felt like he might not appreciate that.
Or receive it well.
Yeah, or receive it well, or be angry about it, or whatever. And growing up, I'm like, my dad's just a lovable teddy bear. Really, he is. He's just a big teddy bear. Can give that guy a big squeeze. He's the biggest hugger. He's always been a hugger, but just like, man, the guy's a teddy bear. As a young kid and as an adolescent, I saw him as more of an intimidating man because he always had the last word. Okay. And as I've gotten older, he started listening.
Isn't that interesting?
It's super interesting. He's had his own experiences in his own life and whatever else. And this isn't all about me, but I wanted to share that I had written him in an amends letter, essentially a letter about things that I had been going through. I wanted to get all this stuff off my chest. I wrote it years ago, and our communication changed after that quite a bit because I made a commitment in that. I said, I make a promise to you that I will be more communicative. And like you, I won't have these unwritten or unspoken expectations, right? I said them. I said what I wanted in that letter and what I expected from him. And what I always wanted was him just to love me for who I was, period. No expectations of who I was going to be or what he wanted me to be, or, and so this ended up going to Wisconsin. We spent a month there. Man, we had like such an emotional conversation, and it was probably over an hour. It wasn't much longer than that. Everything was clear, diffused. It was my amends. I really was asking for forgiveness from my part in assuming that those feelings and what happened there, which he had no idea. He didn't know. He didn't know that I felt a certain way. He didn't know that I was reacting a certain way because of a certain thing. And he said, wow. He said, I didn't know that. And we were able to like hug and just bless each other, and it was just like, it was amazing. And now we're close. I mean, we can talk anytime. We get on the phone and it's not like a stern conversation. It's like we're laughing half the time, and they're lighthearted conversations. We can talk about deep things. And that was so pivotal in our relationship, which was just clearing up the mess that I knew was there. I took care of my part. And I think that we all have relationships in our life where if we can take care of our stuff that we hauled into that, maybe it didn't turn out how we wanted it to, and the other person still has baggage, but you know what? Can't be resentful about it, because the definition of resentment is drinking poison and hoping the other person dies.
Yeah.
So you take care of yours, and you know what? The load's lighter. This isn't the goal, but oftentimes the other person goes, you know what? Hey, I wasn't perfect either. And back to that conversation, he told me about his childhood and different things there. And I was like, wow, I didn't know these certain things. And it gave me a whole new respect for my dad that I never had. And and that's just, it's a relationship that's super meaningful, right? Whether it's a husband and wife, whether it's a father and a son, or a father and a mother, or father and mother you need to, talk to, because we all grow up in families, right? This is where it all comes back to, is we grew up in families. where we had certain feelings and or certain operating systems that were running certain ways. And we can actually clear up any baggage that we have. We don't need to even expect any outcome, right? From that conversation, we can go into that conversation, we can have it or share what we need to share, and we can exit gracefully having unloaded those stones out of our backpack.
Think of the power. So this is one thing that you go through your life and you just never address any of that stuff and just kind of harbor your bitter feelings or whatever. You're the only one carrying them. And nobody else even knows. What you're stealing from the next generation is not being able to pass on those lessons. You clean that up with your dad, create this amazing relationship, and now you automatically have that desire to have that with Onyx, right? So like what amazing gift that's going to be that, you guys doing that can give to the next generation. So I have a similar experience with Shania that I've shared with you. The relationship that you would want to have with a child, like we have that today, right? And it's that same open relationship that's not controlling or judging or, constant lectures and this is, judgment and all that kind of stuff. It's more of a interested in hearing how your life is going. And if you need some advice, I'm here. If you need a sounding board, I'm here. I'm genuinely curious to see how your life is going, right? Whereas the relationship that was there was one where I was gripping the wheel tightly, trying to control the path that her life was on, which I judged as being the wrong path. So what's interesting is as soon as I let go, it got so bad that I had no choice but to let go. Like that was the only choice left. The irony is probably that's the choice God wanted me to make all along. I was just gripping the wheel. So I get in the back seat, it was like a light switch. So suddenly the opportunity to have the relationship or the environment became open to have the relationship we really wanted. Both of us, both her as the daughter and me as the father, right? So now I get to sit in the back seat and enjoy the journey and appreciate her for who she really is. And all of the dark clouds and, anger and all those negative emotions associated with trying to control and her fighting that control, all that stuff just went away. And of course, now the rest of the kids get to enjoy from that experience. I'm like, I'm not doing that again. So all the rest of the kids get to enjoy the benefits of that as well.
I'm just soaking that up right there. That's just beautiful. My goodness. Interesting thing to reflect back on. Even the other person always does know, like, so say the one person's harboring feelings, the other person knows that something's not all cleared up because you don't give of yourself freely. You don't give your love freely. You don't give of yourself freely to the other individual when you've got those feelings. You might do some nice actions or you might do some nice things or whatever, but you're not freely just being you because you're on guard just a little bit.
Oh, for sure.
It's interesting. I think that my dad has experienced with myself that freedom now. That was one of his comments was like, I knew something wasn't right, but I never knew what it was. I could never put my finger on it. I never knew what it was. And so it's allowed him to be more free. He's had some transformative and he's gone through a lot of transformation over these past couple of years, specifically in his own life. And he could share about that. I won't speak to his experiences, but the people that he's met and the open conversations he's had, he's like, man, I didn't know this guy since my childhood. And like, we've had these conversations and I've opened up things. It's amazing how much your life opens up this is, I guess, where we're all really going is if you take your hands off the steering wheel, you can just let go of that wheel and just really realize, and also thank God for the journey that you're on. Like life isn't happening to you, right? That whole quote, it's happening for you. And it's like instead of like a victim role, it's actually happening to you. God's giving it just like the perfect journey for you. Be thankful for that journey. I was a first, Shania was first. So I think it's a natural response with birth order. The older kids usually get a little bit of the shorter end of the stick just because the parents are figuring it out. They're figuring out parenthood. It's not any fault of the parents. They're just like, they don't want to be seen as like the aloof parent who lets their kid go off and just do whatever they want. They're trying to navigate the waters of parenting. And so if you've got kids or you are the oldest child, you probably have experienced some of that too, where it's like, man, maybe my parent was a little bit controlling or whatever else. And it's like, give them a little bit of grace, have a good conversation with them, let them know that you love them and how much you do care for them and the sacrifices that they did give you. It's not, you don't need to blame them. There's an evolution in that, right? There was a period where I was stuck in that, like, man, he did do this stuff and whatever, and this happened and whatever. But that was just a part of the journey, got through that. And it's like the beauty on the other side, just keep working. If you're in that spot where you're feeling like you want to blame somebody around you for something else that's happening, keep working through it, keep persevering because you will come out the other side if you're working at it in the right direction and you're not wanting to continue blaming that individual. There's freedom.
if you start to consider the idea that, use that example as the oldest child, like God knows what their experience needs to be. So he allows them the opportunity to be the oldest child.
Mm-hmm.
So consider the gift of being the oldest child is living through that experience makes you maybe a stronger person or more independent or whatever it is. And that the last child is the spoiled child who can't do anything for themselves, right? So like, even though you wanted that, God knew that that wasn't a fit for you because he has something bigger for you to do or whatever that is. I think a lot of this whole conversation around belief and around feelings is just really to have an awareness when you're about to go work on your relationship. And in this case, we're writing a book about marriage. Just have an awareness that those things are real and they're happening to you and they're also happening over there as well, to the degree that you're willing to have faith and believe that your car is going to be steered and you don't need to. It's like finding the path. And now you can run down the path and you don't have to trudge through this deep snow anymore.
I love it. Yeah, beautiful. I'm super excited for the book and for the workbook piece, especially too, because I'm like, that's like the finishing touch. I know you've been working on this for a period of time here. So it's going to be, so this has come up on a lot of podcasts, a lot of guests and people. Last guest I had actually on, we talked about from like lemons into lemonade, essentially. And we talked about marriage and we talked about growing in marriage and being there for each other and our spouses and whatnot. And it was a really good, through the eyes of Christ and the mind of, just like with a Christian backdrop on it all. Every time I've had a conversation with someone about it, I always mention that I have a good friend who is writing a marriage retreat book. And I mentioned the marriage retreat. They're like, ooh, that sounds really, really cool. Because they'll talk about how they're working on things. And I'm like, do you guys do a marriage retreat? And they're like, marriage retreat, what's that? So there's people waiting for this book and especially the workbook to come out. So
Well, I really appreciate you inviting me back to work through this. As you know, like I can articulate, or it seems like I have that freedom to articulate the perspective easier in a conversation than I do if I grab a pen. So really appreciate you walking me through this and excited to get to work on the actual writing of this.
Yeah, perfect. We'll have you back on to discuss the process and the stuff that comes up for you as you're writing it, because I'm sure there'll be more things that you're going to realize. As I've been working on the book right now is like first draft, I'm just rolling through it, no edits, nothing, just going through the whole thing, then going back and then doing self-editing a couple times or whatever. But yeah, man, I feel like with edits, man, you can get so stuck, in a book where if you're just self-editing yourself as you're writing, it's like, so it's nice that you're doing the spoken and you're taking a lot of this from verbal conversation and applying that to your book.
Well, I feel like the workbook part of it is, that's where the magic happens. So this conversation is kind of the fundamentals that are important to have an awareness of. But the following the workbook, and it's not something that needs to be created because we've been doing this for about 4 years now. But that's where the magic happens. So, this is just context.
Beautiful. All right. Well, we'll be back soon. Everyone, I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast today with Jack Martin. Stay tuned for our next episode together.
Thank you, Peter.
Hey guys, I hope you really enjoyed 80th episode of the Rise Again podcast. Jack Martin, such a fun guest. Can't wait for his book and his marriage retreat manual and workbook to come out. That's going to be awesome. Now I want to put in a quick plug for Naturopathic Consultants Nonprofit. This is the nonprofit that I founded, and I am working with different populations of people to try to give them the best care possible, unconstrained from the financial restraints that people often have in getting phenomenal care and a listening ear that they so deserve. If you know anybody who is associated with a foster or adoptive family, or a military veteran, or has low or fixed income, or is a health professional student in training, you can send them over my way. Have them go to theriseagainpodcast.com. Look on that page, find the contact information, reach out to me. That way, they can reach out to me and we can set up a consultation, see if they would be a good candidate to work with me here at Naturopathic Consultants Nonprofit. Would love to help them, love helping people. Such a fulfilling way to live my life. So if you know any people who fall into those categories, send them my way. I hope you guys have a phenomenal week. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Rise Again podcast. Hey, thanks for listening to the Rise Again podcast. Great episode, hey? You know what? I really love interviewing people and I love getting people on who have things to share with the world. So if you have a really cool guest that you'd like to get on the podcast, email me and I will do my best to get them on the show. I hope you guys have a phenomenal week and stay tuned for the next episode of the Rise Again podcast.